Leonardo DiCaprio.
Miss Anne Hathaway.
Meryl Streep, the Iron Lady.
Alan Arkin in Little Miss Sunshine.
Kevin Costner.
Yes.
The King's Speech.
Birdman.
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Redoing the Oscars, a weekly series where we talk about an alternative Oscars history for one of the main categories, talk about some other performances that I think deserve a little bit of love. We started off the series talking about a little bit of context in terms of the year that we're talking about, then we pick an alternative performance or movie that was nominated that didn't win, and then we pick another performance that we like to talk about that wasn't even nominated at all, as an excuse to kind of redo the Oscars, do an alternative history, try to right the wrongs of what the Academy is based on my personal preferences and historical context. We're trying to figure out at the very end of the episode, did the Academy get it right? Is this just a personal preference where I would have liked this performance over another, or was this actually a kind of a mistake that they made at the time that they had to maybe recorrect later on, or that is kind of the general consensus amongst the film-loving community, which I hope you are a part of. And if you are, comment below. Let me know your thoughts. I love to hear people's thoughts in the comments. They've been very engaged in past episodes in terms of just giving me their thoughts on what they would have picked, an alternative unnominated pick, sharing their thoughts from a year. It's a great kind of a fun exercise we're going to be doing every single year going forward until September before the Oscar season starts back up. Should be a blast for these next few months, so I hope you stick around. But let's get into things, starting off with the 2002 Oscars history context. The Best Picture winner was Chicago, and yet, to me, this isn't the Chicago Oscars. In the same way last week I talked about how it was the Lord of the Rings Oscars. It won 11 awards, including Best Picture. This year is a little bit more split. And in many ways, to me, this is the Roman Polanski Oscars. He wins for Best Director, he gets a standing ovation, and even though he will never probably win Best Picture in his lifetime, I think this was his kind of peak of being celebrated by the kind of mainstream of Hollywood. He is kind of in this Woody Allen zone where he's been kind of pseudo-canceled, but he is still very well appreciated, I think, within people who have seen his films, even though they don't like his legal troubles and controversy, which are definitely real and worth examining. And of controversy, I mean, he's been excommunicated from the United States and has been living in Europe for many years. And I think many young film fans have not really engaged with his movies because of the controversy, because even, on podcasts and things like that, people aren't necessarily going to go out of their way to celebrate him, despite the fact that I think most people who see his movies really respect them. And that's why I think in 2002, you had a lot of people really wanting to celebrate Polanski, and like I said, giving him a standing ovation for his kind of contributions to cinema throughout the 70s and into the 2000s. And yet what's so interesting about The Pianist, the film that he ultimately won for, I haven't mentioned, it's actually, out of the Best Picture nominees, aside from Lord of the Rings or The Return of the King, the highest rated on IMDb and the most watched on IMDb, and also on Letterboxd. You'd think that maybe young film fans aren't going to get into Polanski and The Pianist because he's kind of a controversial figure, and yet this is still a very popular movie. This is still a movie that I think is a classic in terms of the Holocaust cinema, made by someone who survived it, so it has that sense of authenticity. Now, the film didn't end up winning Best Picture, but won Best Director. Brody won for Best Lead Actor, the youngest actor to ever win in this lead acting category. So that's a huge kind of achievement in terms of the Oscars history generally. So this is almost a year in the same way. 2013 is kind of the gravity year because Alfonso Cuarón won for Best Director, but the film didn't win for Best Picture. Similarly here, I think it's a Chicago movie win, and that will still be remembered. It's still being put on today in Broadway and things like that. It's still a well-beloved musical. But when you think of this year, it's kind of the split between kind of Polanski and Chicago. And I think if we're to identify a specific person that represents this Oscars, to me, it is Roman Polanski. And I think still is, as seen by kind of how much people still appreciate that film. But we're not talking about that film today, or even the Best Lead Actor category by Adrien Brody, which I think is very strong performance. He's very good in the film, and he's still relevant today. He just won a couple of years ago for The Brutalist and worked with Wes Anderson, and he's still very relevant. The other nominees, though, you have, well, we'll talk about Best Actress at the end of the episode, because that's the category that I'm going to be redoing. You have Best Supporting Actress, which is Catherine Zeta-Jones, who, even though she's not as big of a star today, she's kind of stepped back from acting. She was absolutely dynamic in the film, and anyone who's ever seen Chicago, I think, recognizes her as such a strong performance within the film. So that's kind of a win that makes sense for me, and not something that I would necessarily criticize or put down. I think that makes total sense. And then Chris Cooper in Adaptation, one of the strangest wins, but a win that I think makes sense. I think a lot of people, modern day people, still enjoy the Spike Jonze, Charlie Kaufman collaborations. Chris Cooper is a celebrated character actor and working in great movies today, so he's not gone away necessarily. It's kind of weird that he has an Oscar. You wouldn't expect him to have one, but I'm totally glad that he does have one, and it is a movie adaptation that, even though I'm not the biggest fan of, definitely has its fans and is well appreciated today. So if I were to pick any of the categories, I think the main one for me was Best Lead Actress. We're not going to talk about whether or not that was right or wrong until the end of the episode. Instead, let's go into it right now and talk about what I would have picked instead of Nicole Kidman for the hours for Best Lead Actress. I would have gone in my alternative nominated pick, Diane Lane in Unfaithful. And kind of crazy to think that she was nominated for this movie, just because when I think of these kind of erotic dramas, erotic thrillers like A Fatal Attraction or A Disclosure even, they're kind of seen, at least in my mind, as a little bit trashy, not necessarily as well respected by the Academy. And yet this one was, I think, is a testament to Diane Lane and her performance, in the fact that by having such a dynamic performance at its heart, at its center, it was able to kind of elevate its status away from just a trashy, erotic kind of a movie and into an actual potential, Oscar movie, even though she was the only nomination from her film. And I know people on YouTube love Diane Lane. I did an episode on her a few years ago talking about what makes her great, and that's one of my highest viewed videos ever. So I know that there's an appreciation for her, and why I think the movie works so well, and why I think it's such a kind of mystery through character and an engaging thriller through character is because of Diane Lane and her performance. On the surface, you have a character who is very, in my opinion, cut and dry, doing the wrong thing. Cheating, having an affair on her partner, the father of her son, who they're still married. And yet, what's so interesting about the movie, I think, is that she is kind of understandable, kind of relatable. She is kind of this interesting person, or what you think she's a good person, but that maybe she's doing the wrong thing. And then the mystery and the intrigue within the movie is not necessarily waiting for her to get caught, because of course you know she will. It's more so in the fact of trying to understand the complexity of her emotions, trying to understand why a person like this would so willingly kind of self-destroy their lives. And then I think because of that, her performance, you get into these very interesting ideas of like shame and guilt and sexual satisfaction or frustration, or just like this compulsion to destroy your own life for these kind of carnal desires. It is this kind of psychological thriller in that sense, in the erotic sense, yes, but still very psychological in our relationships with others, and this idea of danger and our kind of human instinctual allure to do something that is wrong, is wrong, but you still can't help it anyways because there's something exciting about it. And Diane Lane is such a great performance in this film because she's able to have all those emotions going on at once, all that complexity going on at once, so much so that we're kind of constantly debating, is this a right person? In one scene, she almost enjoys the kind of affair so much that we go, I'm out on her, she's a terrible person. But in the next, she shows this immense amount of shame and guilt. And we go, okay, maybe she is a good person. And it's this constant shifting back and forth between scenes. She's able to communicate all these different emotions, so much so that we're constantly, at least I am, intrigued in what she's going to do next and how she's going to play the next scene, and just the gamut of emotions in which she's able to communicate to us. It's not a movie with necessarily a complicated plot until the kind of second half of the movie. It is pretty straightforward. It's just a woman having an affair on her husband. But what's so interesting about it is trying to understand the psychology of Diane Lane and how she kind of navigates the situations and how she's able to bring an ultimate sense of humanity and decency to this person that on paper doesn't really deserve it. So it's an incredible test of her ability to generate empathy for her character and to communicate those genuinely complex themes on her face, through her line readings, through her sometimes uncomfortable shifting body language. It really is a tour de force performance that if you haven't seen because you thought it was just like a trashy erotic thriller, definitely check it out. It kind of is that. It's also beautifully shot and edited, and she's also absolutely fantastic in the movie. So it kind of has it in its script and its form, but in its execution and in its craft and in its central performance from Diane Lane, it is an absolute master kind of a psychological drama as it is an erotic thriller. But then my alternative non-nominated pick of a lead actress performance that I think should have gotten nominated, and maybe even won too, would be Jodie Foster in Panic Room. And what's so fascinating about this performance is that it was actually supposed to be Nicole Kidman until she got pregnant and wasn't able to do the film. Funnily enough, though, Nicole Kidman ends up winning the Oscar and Jodie Foster wasn't even nominated, so maybe, what do I know? But I do love Jodie Foster in this movie. And it's not necessarily because of her performance and her ability to communicate what the character is feeling necessarily, which is kind of a bad thing to say. But, in the past we've talked about Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, and I gave him my alternative non-nominated pick and award that year because I just thought it was a perfect example of Tom Cruise as a movie star. Well, in Panic Room, I think it's a perfect example of Jodie Foster as a movie star. If I were to criticize the performance or the movie in general, it's almost not as interested in the personal dynamics, or I don't think I ever really care if they're going to be in danger or if the kid's going to, played by Kristen Stewart, her daughter, is going to get hurt or whatnot. What I love about it, though, and what I think Fincher is so great at, is creating this kind of mini sandbox and putting his characters in continual situations in which they have to outsmart, outthink, and problem solve real time in film. It's his film that reminds me the most of The Killer. Panic Room and The Killer, I think, are both very similar. That one's literally about a psychopath who has no emotions. And Jodie Foster does have emotions within the film. It's just not something that I'm engaged with. And why I think it's ultimately an interesting movie star performance is because Jodie Foster is the absolute best actor at radiating intelligence. She seems so incredibly smart and competent and resilient. So putting her in a situation in which she has to outthink people, has to be resilient, and just precisely watching her think, watching her problem solve, watching her notice something and realize that she has to run over there within a certain time to get back, or to how to kind of outsmart these guys and get in contact with the police, and all these different problem solving instances that we watch throughout the film, Jodie Foster is perfectly suited for, because she's so great at thinking, she's so great at kind of getting you on her side and communicating to us that she is thinking, that she is problem solving, and has this sense of, like I said, resilience and strength. And she still has a very basic emotional kind of a core and center that we can relate to in terms of a mother trying to do everything she can to protect her child, and does foster as a performer. I'll give her credit in the sense of add in some moments of fear, some genuine fear where you buy that she is scared for her life. But I do ultimately love it because, I love the film, and I love almost all of Fincher's films, but also because I think it's a great example of Foster and her ability to process, to think, to problem solve, to radiate intelligence. That is, when I think of her movie star persona, that's what I think of most, whether it be Silence of the Lambs, or even something like Accused. It's always like, this person is a lot smarter than people think, and we're going to watch her, get her way out of things. Flight Plan, I think, is similar territory. Even something like Naiad, which is a more emotional, but it is like a quiet, reserved, thoughtful person who's going about their lives. That's what Jodie Foster's best at. And if you want to see the best version of that, I think that's Panic Room. So it's kind of an underrated movie. I don't think many people would talk about it if it weren't for David Fincher, except it is a David Fincher movie. People do talk about it, and I think it's a movie I constantly rewatch, and I'm constantly amazed by just how fun and easy to watch Jodie Foster is. And I think we should celebrate that kind of a movie star magic as well. But to end off things, let's try to figure out now, did the Academy get it right? And I'm going to go with a definitive hell no. I like Nicole Kidman. I don't necessarily love Nicole Kidman. I know this may upset the internet because she is the kind of face of AMC in that AMC ad, and she's kind of very funny on red carpets and things like that. But she's made a bunch of mediocre kind of TV shows, and her movie output hasn't been as strong as it was in the 90s and early 2000s. And I think this performance is just a classic example of a famous, beautiful woman putting on makeup to uglify themselves to therefore win an Oscar. And I really hate that kind of a trope. It's something that really doesn't sit right with me. In particular, we talked about Charlize Theron last week with Monster, who is a similar situation, but at least she's trying to looked like a real life person. And I know Nicole Kidman technically is, but we don't have a lot of like video footage of Virginia Woolf. It could have been fine. I think people wouldn't have been so upset that she didn't look exactly like Virginia Woolf. It's not like an iconic modern day figure that so many people who were watching the movie knew distinctly their face. So it would have been fine, I think, if they hadn't done that. I think the movie is just generally forgettable. Nicole Kidman's only in really like a third of the movie either, so weird for her to win Best Lead Actress when she doesn't have a lot of screen time generally. And then it also compounds with the fact that when you look at the rest of the nominees, I would have gone with literally every other one. I think Salma Hayek is absolutely fantastic in Frida. Julianne Moore, well, I'm glad she has an Oscar for Still Alice. Far From Heaven and her, Todd Haynes types of films are probably her most well-respected, along with maybe some of her Paul Thomas Anderson stuff. Maybe we could have gone with her. Renee Zellweger, we talked about last week. She gets this makeup Oscar for Cold Mountain, which she probably shouldn't have, because she could have maybe just won here for Chicago, and she's great in the film, and then we wouldn't have to give her an Oscar the next year. And then my ultimate pick is Diane Lane. That's my preference of the nominees, but I think I would have gone with every other performance before Nicole Kidman, even though I think Nicole's a great actress, and she's very well respected online. I like her. I don't necessarily love her. I do appreciate and love a lot of her movies, whether it be To Die For or Eyes Wide Shut. There are other great performances for her to win for, just not The Hours. It's just kind of a forgettable, boring movie. And when she doesn't have a lot to do, she's barely in the movie, and it's mostly just because she wears prosthetics. And is that enough to win an Oscar? I thought it was a little bit cheap. I thought it was a little bit silly. And when I look back on it, I think the Academy, if they had the chance, probably would redo it for any one of the nominees. But let me know in the comments down below. Are there any Hours fans out there? Have you seen some of the other performances? What would be your pick? Do you like Diane Lane in Unfaithful? Do you like Jodie Foster in Panic Room? Love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.